So today we are focused on three things: learning, woo, celebrating, woo, and taking action, woo. Thank you everyone for the sound effects. We really want you to leave with practical steps to take. So let's start with learning. With so much at stake this November, we feel it's vital that we all understand what groups in the health justice movement, especially nonprofits, can do in the next 2 months. So this includes educating, advocating, taking action to connect our work with civic engagement. We're going to take time to share concrete examples of what some of us are up to and what you can do too to join in. We're also going to dispel fears about the legal constraints, and we have our handy dandy Monica here to talk about that, to help us understand what 501c3 organizations can do. And while we may be able to do more than we think, perhaps less than we'd like, we're going to spend this time to think about the sweet spot to maximize our advocacy within legal bounds so that everyone feels really comfortable. Okay, second takeaway, celebrating. If everyone can go on their Zoom emoji things and pop up the celebrating emoji, we're doing the virtual light up the Zoom. Thank you everyone for humoring me. It is Civic Health Month, and this week, or today, is the second day of National Community Health Worker Awareness Week. So celebration, thank you everyone for the Zoom emojis. So August is Civic Health Month because health is always on the ballot. This month is to highlight the link between voting and health, celebrating efforts that ensure every voter can support their community's health at the ballot box. We're also on day 2 of the second ever National Community Health Worker Awareness Week. This is a campaign led by the National Association of Community Health Workers that aims to raise awareness of CHW identity, their impact on communities, and their leadership roles. It's also a time to advocate for policies that respect and support the CHW profession. We at PIH are thrilled to celebrate CHWs and recognize their critical role in promoting community and civic health. Okay, so we've done our 2 takeaways so far, learning and celebrating. Is everyone like getting these 3 with me? The third takeaway, action. How can we link health justice and civic participation, and how do we do it? So we're really hoping for everyone to leave this call with at least one new action you can take that expands space for civic engagement in your work. Why are we emphasizing civic engagement? And I feel like I've talked about this a little, but I want to reiterate it because we know that elections, particularly this November's election, from the local, state to national level, will shape the future of health and our fights for justice. So it's up to us to support our communities, particularly those with low income and people of color, to get to the polls. Civic engagement means more than just voting, and it is voting. It's about making a plan, talking about how health justice is on the ballot, understanding who gets to make decisions about the issues that we care about. Maybe you'll notice how much we can discuss without mentioning a candidate or party. We believe in the power of voting and making our voices heard and fighting for health justice. Okay, so our last call, which was 2 months ago now, highlighted how health justice is on the ballot. Today's call is reiterating, emphasizing the urgency. We don't want to create a sense of false urgency, but we recognize the importance of urgency and working together. Because we know that if we don't engage voters, our fights for justice will be deeply impacted by the election results. So without further ado, I am so excited that we have some incredible panelists joining us today. Thank you to the 3 of you for taking your time to spend with us. And I always like to note on these calls that our speakers, while incredible advisors to us in this moment, are not a representative sample of the hundreds of thousands of people fighting in this movement who span a range of identities, knowledge, and lived experiences, nor do we expect these speakers to represent all views. So with that said, let's bring on our panelists. We're going to do some spotlighting. Thank you, Lucas, for the help. Monica Graham is the Bilingual Council Boulder Advocacy at Alliance for Justice. Honey Yang Estrada, the president of the North Carolina Community Health Worker Association. and Justin Quassa, Democracy Program Director at the League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. So the panelists and I had some time to chit chat, think about some questions that we want to ask and talk about. So please sit back, relax, take it all in. I'm going to do some spotlighting because I was just informed. Oh, that's now making my face really big. Okay. Add spotlight. And honey, you're coming up. Add spotlight. Okay, hopefully you can see the four of us. Okay. We often have this as a panel chat amongst the four of us, but because we recognize that we really want to take some time to dispel fear and just make us feel really confident as 501c3s of what we can do, Monica's here to give us a concrete presentation before we get into our chat. So Monica, what can we do? How can health justice advocates at nonprofits safely educate, advocate, and take action during election seasons? And hopefully
Thanks,
you can share
Ally.
your screen.
Yeah, yep. Let's see. Can y'all
Woohoo!
see that?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I will give everyone a heads up that this is a very condensed version of our election season advocacy training, but I tried to hit all the really important points, and then we'll go over a couple of examples of how just to like word things and stay in that safe zone. So I cannot give you legal advice, even though I am a lawyer. I can discuss the rules with you, but I can't tell you what to do after that. So if there is something that you're coming up against that you're really unsure of, please consider seeking outside legal counsel just to make sure everything's good. But I'm going to move quickly and yeah, I'm going to jump in. So first, just a brief overview of a few different, sorry, it's my doggo, a few different tax exempt organizations. We have 501c3 private foundations, but you can see also that we have 501c3 public charities and community foundations. So these are pretty similar. They're both tax exempt, both receive tax deductible contributions. When it comes to lobbying, 501c3 private foundations, it says extremely limited, but really, if private foundations engage in lobbying or instruct others to engage in lobbying, they'll be hit with an excise tax, which essentially prohibits them from lobbying because it's so high. When it comes to partisan political activities, both in that category cannot engage in partisan political activities. So that's things like making endorsements, independent expenditures, things like that. 501c3s cannot do that, cannot support or oppose candidates that are up for public office. 501c4s, a little bit different, also tax exempt. They don't receive those tax deductible contributions, but the trade-off there is that they can engage in unlimited lobbying and they can also engage in partisan political activity so long as it remains their secondary activity and doesn't take over their primary purpose. Be cautious if you work in coalition with the 501c4 as a C3 public charity, because your tax exempt status follows you into that coalition work. So you can only participate as a C3, you can only participate in nonpartisan coalition work. So remember, C3s across the board cannot support or oppose candidates. They must remain nonpartisan. And in true IRS fashion, there's no bright line rule for what nonpartisan means, right? That partisan activity is a little bit more obvious. Those endorsements, those independent expenditures, things like express advocacy, vote for candidate A. But sometimes that nonpartisan stuff is a little bit more gray. So the IRS uses a facts and circumstances analysis to decide whether an organization is engaging in partisan activity or whether that activity is truly nonpartisan. So it's more of like a risk analysis, with some things being relatively low risk, some things being in the middle, and some things clearly being high risk. So you can decide as an organization the risk level you're comfortable working at and then proceed from there. Some factors to consider when making this analysis: consider your communication. Does it refer to a candidate? Does it mention the election? Timing, is it related to an election? Is it something that's going on in current events that you're referring to? So if you have an independent, nonpartisan reason for your communication or your activity, something that has nothing to do with an election or a candidate, that's going to keep you in that green zone. But of course, if it refers to candidates, if you're only conducting an activity or releasing a communication because of an election, if you're trying to influence voters or telling voters how to vote, all of that's going to put you in that red zone, right? But there are a lot of things that you can do as a 501c3. And here's where I hope to dispel some of that fear. I find that organizations will completely reel in their advocacy because they don't know the rules or they're unsure about what they can and cannot do. So as a C3, you can still continue your advocacy, your issue advocacy. You can educate candidates, conduct voter registration, get out the vote, things like that, educate voters about candidates. But again, you have to remain nonpartisan. You can even work on ballot measures. If you're telling voters how to vote on ballot measures, that's going to be lobbying, but perfectly okay for a C3. Just remember to stay within those limits. If a ballot measure is aligned with a specific candidate or a party, a group of candidates, keep that out of your advocacy for that ballot measure. So there's a lot of things that you can do. Just remember to remain nonpartisan. Remember that there might be other rules that apply, but things like legislative scorecards, publishing legislative scorecards and voting records, publishing candidate questionnaires, hosting debates and forums, things like that, perfectly okay for a C3 to do. Again, just be mindful that you're keeping it nonpartisan and those things don't turn in to campaign events. I want to just go over some examples. If you're engaged in issue advocacy, of course, you can continue your issue advocacy during election season. It's highly encouraged to do that. One thing you might want to be mindful of is don't combine your issue advocacy with your voter registration, get out the vote campaigns. So keep them separately or diversify your issue. So maybe you link up with another organization and you focus on, gun control, healthcare, reproductive rights, criminal justice reform, a lot of different issues. So you're not pointing people on how to vote, but you are just highlighting the issues that are important to those organizations. I use this example here. It's the same topic, right? So one says getting sick and seeking care should not affect your ability to purchase a home. It's time for policymakers to keep medical debt off credit reporting. Perfectly C3 safe, right? Doesn't mention an election. It doesn't line with the candidate. There's no colors, symbols, anything like that. Be mindful of your hashtags, of your links, all of those things, because that's all going to be looked at under that facts and circumstances. Now, the one next to it is pretty green as well. I put a yellow heart there just to proceed with caution because Madam Vice President is a candidate in an election, right? So this one might get a little bit trickier. It doesn't refer to the election, though. It doesn't refer to Madam Vice President as a candidate, but just be mindful of that. If you're putting a message like this out, the week before the election, just be mindful of how that could be perceived. Still perfectly C3 safe. You're talking about President Joe Biden and the vice president in their incumbent capacity. So that lowers the risk a little bit, but just be mindful if they are also up for re-election, that might play into the analysis. But these two messages here are perfectly C3 safe. I just put that yellow heart because, again, it does mention Madam Vice President, who's also a candidate in an election that's coming up. Again, you always want to have a nonpartisan, independent reason for putting out a message or hosting an activity. Now, some examples for get out the vote. You can see the ones that say safe. They don't mention an election. They don't mention a candidate. So housing, human services, jobs, you count, register, and vote. You put several different topics there. So if they're all on the ballot, cool. You're not telling anyone who to vote specifically. Be careful of wedge issues. I know everything seems to be a wedge issue these days, but just be careful of issues that clearly divide candidates. You might want to just be more cautious about your wording there. But you can see on the other side things like vote to protect the environment, register here. Let's get out the pro-life vote. Pro-life is an inherently partisan word. So the IRS has deemed anything with pro-life, pro-choice, liberal, conservative as inherently partisan. So that is going to count as partisan activity. And then we just can't afford more of the mixed same, register here to vote. That's really funny, but obviously you're telling people to vote against the incumbent, right? So things like that are not going to be C3 safe. They're going to put you in that red zone. Vote to protect the environment. That one might be a little bit in that yellow zone, because if you have a track record of, advocacy for the environment, environmental justice, things like that, it might not be seen as partisan. But if that's a wedge issue and you're saying vote to protect the environment, then that's going to put you in that partisan zone. All right, that's my last slide. Just want to let y'all know that we have a bunch of resources on our website. We also offer free technical assistance. It's absolutely free. Our library is full of stuff. We have a podcast, a blog, and also you can send us your individual questions, advocacy@afj.org. I'll put it in the chat in a sec. With any questions that you may have. I'm on TA today, so you might get an email from me, but usually we try to respond within 24 to 48 hours. So be patient with us. But yeah, we're here to help. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Sorry, I sped through that, but just trying to be mindful of time.
No, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was so helpful. Everyone, this is recorded, so you can go back. We have the slides, we can share them. This was so helpful. I just want to see like a show of emoji or whatever. Like, does this help your anxiety? Does it make you feel better? Or are you like, oh my gosh, I feel so much worse? I'm hoping for the hearts like honey. Um, Monica, before we move on, actually, there is a question in the chat that I feel like is relevant. So could you speak to saying something like health is always on the ballot? Is that wedge partisan?
So not necessarily. So saying health is always on the ballot, no, it's not going to put you in that wedge partisan zone. I do just want to make a little caveat here. Obviously, it doesn't apply to these groups, but if you're kind of parachuting into a new issue area, just be mindful of that when it's election season. But health is always on the ballot. That's not going to push you in that partisan zone because you have a track record. That's your advocacy. Kind of like Planned Parenthood saying, reproductive justice is on the ballot. It's kind of similar to that because they have a developed track record. So that's not going to put you in that red zone. Again, unless I was going to say unless there's clearly two candidates that's like one's like I hate everything healthcare related. Usually it's not going to be like it's not going to be a wedge issue, partisan issue. Now you don't want to say something like, candidate A really supports healthcare bills or something like that, and healthcare is all on the ballot. You don't want to do anything like that, but health is always on the ballot. It's good. C3 safe. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I want to take us, now that we've learned, like, we got the info, like, here's what we can and can't do. So I really want to spend the rest of the next 40 minutes talking about what we can do. I feel like we so often sit in the can't, but like, let's talk about all the can, because there is definitely more that we all can do. Hopefully you just realized in the last 10 minutes something more that you can do. So now when we know what we can do, how do we do it? So honey, I'm gonna pop it over to you. Please tell us about how community health workers make civic engagement come alive. How did you find the space for civic engagement in your work? Why? How do you do it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Allie. Monica, and you were like a wealth of information. So I was taking some notes while you were talking. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared in your expertise. So I want to start by defining who community health workers are. If you are new to community health workers, CHWs is what we usually say. We are, as defined by the American Public Health Association, as frontline public health workers who have trusting relationships with the communities we serve. We look like our communities. We eat the same food. We speak the same language. We share the same culture. And that really gives us an opportunity to build very trusting, a very unique rapport with the community members we serve. So for CHW specifically, there was a huge light that was shown on the profession during the pandemic. And what I want to share here is that for CHWs, advocacy, and I say advocacy little a, advocacy comes very naturally. We're always thinking about what our community members want. We're always thinking about how we can serve our communities. Part of the disconnect, though, is what I call the advocacy with the big A. That's the policy advocacy, right? That is the talking with our legislators. That can be a little bit intimidating for CHWs. For us specifically in North Carolina, this journey was very organic for us because public health emergency dollars were drying up and there was a need. We heard from the workforce to say, we need to come together. We need to talk about this. We need to be advocating. And so the journey for us in North Carolina was very organic. Me personally, I've never really done advocacy with the capital A. I'm still learning. And, all the things that Monica was talking about, what those limits are, I had to learn to really educate myself on what we can do, what we can't do as a C3. And so what we ended up doing was getting some training. So shout out to our friends at Partners in Health who provided us with some training about what we can say, what we shouldn't say. We did some power mapping, figured out who those key individuals are that we needed to target. And then really we spent that time, our first ever CHW advocacy day, where I remember telling the planning committee, I'll be really excited if we have like 10 CHWs show up, 10 to 20. I'll be really good with that. Where we had over 80 CHWs showed up, which told me that CHWs were really excited and were ready to get out there. So that first ever CHW Advocacy Day really was an opportunity for us to tell our stories, to provide some education around who we are as a workforce and why funding was needed. And that led to our second advocacy day, which happened earlier this year, where we had an ask. So we had an opportunity, now that we've done some education, to really put some asks in place, working with our partners at the state, to define what those asks were. And then that really gave CHWs an opportunity to level up their civic engagement. And what this does too, what we saw was CHWs who have never done this before. They've never done advocacy before. They've never talked to a legislator before. And you see them come in and they're so scared. And I had a CHW pull me to the side and she said, I'm sick. Like, I think I'm going to go throw up because I'm so nervous. And that's real. And we sat her down and we said, you can do this. We're going to go with you. And to see her be so nervous and then go to that meeting with her legislator and then come back and say, you know what, that was a piece of cake. I did the thing, right? And so that was also very empowering for her as a young leader to see that she can actually do this thing, that she had the power within herself to be able to do this thing that she thought was so scary. And what that does, my friends, is that trickles out to her family, that trickles out to her community. So then we see that civic engagement, not just within that one person, but that civic engagement really broadens into that bigger, larger community where we now have CHWs, who in our world we say are activators of legacy, and building that momentum. Again, not just within herself, not just within her own family unit, but overarchingly in her community. And we see these CHW leaders rise up and become more active and more engaged in civic engagement because they start to understand how important it is when those policies at the macro level are impacting what we are doing within our own communities.
Yes, 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 you're getting all the love. Thank you for painting how bringing someone into civic engagement can look different in different spaces. And that can be civic engagement when we're talking about meeting with a legislator. It can be getting people to realize the weight of their vote and why they're different or how there are different ways to make your voice heard, particularly that of your community, and how CHWs can be such activators and agents of that because of the trusted relationship. And I'm excited for you to share more in a little about that. But Justin, I really want to go more to you as an organization that focuses on environmental health and voters and making the connection. How do you talk about how environmental health and democracy are so interconnected? Like, can you teach us how we can connect our issue, um, the message and to democracy and health and civic engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. So, as you mentioned, I come from League of Conservation Voters Education Fund, where we deal with the environment. And to something that Monica said a little bit earlier, environment, unfortunately, it shouldn't be, but it is a very partisan issue. So I think we run into this a lot where what we think should just be a very clear issue where everybody wants clean air, everybody wants clean water, everybody wants communities free of pollution, should be a nonpartisan issue, yet it is. And so we really, really have to focus when we talk to people about voting and about other things like that, is really focusing on we want to make the voices in our community heard. That's really what we focus in on, and that's really how we try to stay on the right side of that kind of C3, C4 window. We have a saying in our organization that says we can't have a healthy environment without a healthy democracy, right? And ultimately what that means is that, as I said earlier, everybody wants these protections, yet we see that in our democracy, that's not happening. And that shows that there's something fundamentally wrong. So if our democracy truly does represent the people and it truly does represent the voices, we know what the results are. And so right now, our focus is making sure that everybody that has a voice in our democracy is heard. And that's really, the messages that we continue to push out to people. And I think it parallels very closely in the environmental message with what we do with the healthcare message. I think, when you look at all the changes in pollution, all the changes in the climate, that directly affects healthcare, because all the things that go wrong on our side, people ultimately are going to show up needing healthcare, need environmental justice, need healthcare justice. And so I think our issues are very closely. And so hopefully some of the lessons that we can have from the environmental space can easily transfer over to some of your community health spaces. Ultimately, when you're talking to people, it really is, and you think about the social determinants of health, people aren't just single issue voters. And so once again, that is why we're really pushing to people to talk about have your voice heard. We're not telling you how to vote, but we know if you are in certain situations, we know if you are affected in certain ways where you are interacting with us, there's a certain way that you want things to go. And so that's why we're really focused on community voices. So that ultimately is how we kind of navigate talking about getting people engaged, even though our organization focuses on the environment, every 2 to 4 years, every time there is election, it is critically important to passing the legislation, to passing the policies that we need for people to have their voices heard at the ballot box and to have them represent representatives that truly, truly do represent them, because right now we know that is not the case. So with that being said, what I wanted to do was just give you all a couple ways that you can get involved this fall in a C3 way to get in order to make sure people's voices heard. Just so you know, I'm going to drop a lot of links. I will make sure to send them all to Allie, and you all will get them later. But just wanted for you all to see them right now, right? So first off, the one that we're all talking about, the one that everybody talks about, is making sure that people register to vote. But not only that you're registering to vote, but that also people that are already think they're registered to vote can check your registration to make sure you still are registered, right? Because I think a lot of times there are vote purges, people move, there are any number of things that people who think they have their voice might not actually do it. And so we really encourage people to kind of use the Vote America tool. It has a full suite of things that they can do in order to make sure that they have their voice, their registration all in order. Next thing we're doing, which you guys are already doing and why you guys are here, is tell a friend, tell a patient, right? So Not only should you register yourself to vote, but also encourage the people in your neighborhood, people around you, to vote as well, because obviously political power does come from us as a whole speaking with one voice in order to get our issues done, right? And so that means the full community is also engaging. Another thing that goes to the Vote America tools that you see is really encouraging people to either vote early, because sometimes a Tuesday in November isn't the most convenient time for people to vote. So please encourage people to vote early, vote by mail or vote early in person. Or if you are going to vote person on election day, make a plan to vote. Any number of things can happen the day before election. I myself, earlier this year, injured myself 3 days before election, and that threw off my whole voting plan, and actually didn't end up voting, which is the first time in a long time. But things happen, and so once again, encouraging people to vote early, or if you are voting on election day, really making a plan so that you can you don't have your voice taken away due to circumstances outside of your control. The last three things are really ways that people can engage and go beyond just voting and go beyond just talking about voting. So number one is poll working, right? So as you all know, when you go to vote in person, there are people from your community that are helping administer the election, checking you in, making sure you have your ballot, collecting your ballot at the end. That requires people, right? And that requires a lot of people in order to make sure our elections run smoothly. So dropping in the Power of the Polls, which is the website, and yes, that is the LCVEF link. Obviously, we're trying to get our numbers up too, but to really encourage people, if you have the time that day, to actually become a poll worker and get involved in the process in order to make sure that the people in your community have their voices heard. And particularly if you speak another language, or if there's something specific about your community that poll workers need to know, it's really important that we encourage people to drive people to be poll workers. If you can't, spend a whole day being a poll worker, there's also being a poll monitor outside the polls and making sure that there are no intimidations or suppressions happening in or outside the polls. And so dropping protectthevote.net, which is part of the Election Protection Network. So on election day, checking to make sure that nobody is being suppressed or intimidated when they are trying to vote. And then the final thing, which is new, unfortunate, but is going to be a part of our elections from here on out, is really monitoring, pushing back, and reporting disinformation when you see it. So there's going to be a lot of false information that's out there. Dropping in a report disinfo, another part of the Election Protection Coalition, where if you see some information that's wrong, if folks are saying, oh, you can vote online, you can vote by text message, or I hear that this is happening there, when you see information that is not true, being able to report it so that we can get the right information out to folks and folks aren't led astray on election day. Once again, all these are C3, and these are all ways beyond just voting on election day that you and your organizations can help make sure your community's voices are heard. With that, like I said, I will drop all these for you to follow up on, but just a couple ideas of how you can talk to community about voting, as well as some of the resources you can use in order to make sure that they can vote.
Hey, Allie, do you mind if I chime in on something that Justin said? So you said, like, you didn't use these exact words, but the community you serve will likely be able to tell which way your organization would vote. So if they make that inference on their own, like that's not on you, right? Like that's not on your organization. If a candidate shouts out your organization, that's also not on you. You can't control like what they're saying or the inferences they're making. So you want to protect your organization, but also I mean, obviously your cause, your mission, your issue advocacy, the public's going to know how you would like them to vote and how likely your people would vote. So don't be too concerned about that. Just be more mindful that you're not straight out saying vote for candidate A, vote for candidate B. Also, if you're hosting like a debate or something and the candidate just like goes rogue, make sure that you have like documentation that you told them to remain nonpartisan, things like that, just to again protect the organization. But I wouldn't worry too much about what the people and the candidates are saying if you've taken the steps to protect your org.
Thank you for that clarification. And I think it's so helpful in real time to even hear like Justin saying what they're up to, and Monica, for you to validate that and just be like, we're good. And I just like want to reemphasize there's so much that all of us can do as 501c3 groups. And that's really empowering, at least for me, because I know it can feel like we're really stuck. And so I want everyone to really sit with that and think about everything that we can do. And when we start wrapping up, we're going to talk about like a few more action steps. But honey, I wanted to pass it back to you. I saw that you were taking some notes, how you wanted to respond to that.
Which part specifically, Allie? The part of the, oh, you're muted, my friend.
Oh, goodness. I muted myself. And thank you for the resources in the chat. When Justin's talking about how the messages that they're using to connect with voters and how to connect with their community, I was curious how you were talking with community health workers about how they can engage with their community and talking about civic engagement, civic health.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that part of it, you know, and the both of you, Monica and Justin, touched on so many things. And I'm like, yes, CHWs, it's just like lights are going off for me, right? I think as we think about this, one of the things that mostly resonates with me and mostly shines out and stands out for me is when we're talking about the fact of civic engagement and CHW specifically. Part of this is and in my circles and my spheres of influence, we know that CHWs know the solutions in their communities, right? And so this is why it's so important for CHWs to be involved in civic engagement. And this is what we really advocate and teach our CHWs to do, is because if they know it, then they can go back and share this information with their communities. And then those communities are stronger and they're making informed decisions. I know personally, you know, when Justin, when you and Monica were both talking about our poll workers in my community where I live. So some of you know that I also teach Zumba at the local library. And one of my participants is a CHW, and she works the polls. And she comes back and she's like, she tells me all kinds of stories about what's going on. And because she works the polls and she sees this and she knows what's happening, she can then go back and share this information with her community to say, hey, this is what's going on. Make sure you do this. And she is doing hand in hand work with that community to say, let me teach you how to do this. Don't be afraid. When you go to the polls, this is what they're going to ask you. This is what you need to bring. This is what you don't need to bring. Make sure, like you said, Justin, make sure you have a plan, right? And so I think that, you know, for CHW specifically, it is taking that level of support that we provide on an everyday basis. This is taking it to the next level and really honing and like pounding to the pavement how important civic engagement is, because yes, public health is always on the ballot. Yes.
Yes. Justin, I'm curious from you when talking about, you know, public health is on the ballot, environment is on the ballot. How do you talk to voters or people in your community who are feeling discouraged, are understandably feeling like their voice isn't heard? What is clear messaging that you use and an example of such that has been able to bring someone in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, ultimately, my personal thing, maybe not for everyone, but my personal thing is actually do a little bit of a history lesson and understand that, you know, particularly with communities, or communities that, you know, we consider underrepresented, underserved, that's there for a reason, right? Historically, so many of our communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, purposefully were not allowed to vote. And so that's how this kind of tiered level of injustice has been able to happen, because they haven't had a voice, right? Because Black people haven't been able, because women haven't been able to vote, because Indigenous people weren't even considered, you know, citizens until 100 years ago. And so ultimately, while it doesn't seem like it's working, the only way in order to build a voice is to participate, and then also to do the work, and then also like is to do the work in order to participate for elections, but then also say that voting is the first part, right? you can elect people into office, but then all of a sudden you have to follow up with action and holding folks accountable, right? And so also explaining in that this is not just you do this one thing and it's over. It is that this is part of an ongoing process that where you are asserting your voice in our democracy. And so also giving them additional opportunities after voting in order to engage, or even what we did here is saying like, hey, not only can you vote, here are all the other things that you could do in your community in order to make sure your and your community's voice is also heard before or during and on election day too. So that's usually how I try to deal with this, give at least the historical context for why you feel like your voice hasn't been heard, as well as giving them options right now of what they can do in order to enhance the voice of them in their communities.
Yes, I think that's one really important to ground in the history of all of this, and validating people's real experiences and where they come from, and that you get that, and that this isn't this just one-off thing that you're supposed to do. This is part of this collective team sport. Advocacy, community is a team sport. None of this is an individual skill. And what I'm hearing from all of you is like this message is do something. Don't let fear paralyze you. Talk to your people. And we talk about this, about all these different issues, not just civic engagement, because it's about being part of something greater and contributing and letting our voices be heard. And what I'm hearing from all of you is the best way to do something is to meet as your group, your organization, your committee, looking at your situation and picking what you all can do together to bring something like civic engagement into your work. So when you work at, a health organization or a reproductive justice organization, you're bringing this in because they're all connected. So, and also I just wanted to name like, and Justin, I know you said some links and we talked about this yesterday. When we're talking about the November election, like voting starts early, like voting is starting very soon. And so Justin, when you're talking about making a plan to vote, that's also that's now. And just how can we help our communities in making their voices heard, making a plan. This is not saying this is who you need to vote for. This is saying like, hey, let's think about it. Your poll is open at this hour. How do we get to the poll on this time? Okay, let's recheck your registration. Let's check your ID. Do you have the right ID with you? Because the laws are different by states. In the follow-up email, everyone, I will also be sharing information from organizations like Vote Riders who help us figure out the ID laws by state. So I just wanted to reemphasize that. We'll share some more resources. I'm curious from all three of you, what is your final call to action? Like, what should everyone here be doing as health justice advocates to center civic engagement with our communities? Like, what do we need to take back with us now?
For me, the most important thing is knowledge, education, not only for yourself, for your organization, for your staff, but also for the people that you serve. I find that a lot of people, just like organizations, don't, vote or partake in advocacy or engage because they don't know what to vote for, who to vote for, what's going on. They're not informed. So again, I want to shout out our resources because there's so many good stuff on our library.
And they're free.
Yeah. Our TA line's also free. So again, send as many questions as you want. That's what we're here for. But yeah, educating yourself and educating your community, educating legislators, your candidates about what's going on in your community and secret info. Most of the times they don't know anything about anything, not the bills, not the issues, not any of it. So get in good with their staff, things like that. But I think education, knowledge, and being informed is probably the most important thing in my opinion.
All right. I don't want to be overshadowed by Honey, so I'm just going to hop in and let her go last. But one of the things I would say is don't underestimate the impact that you have on people's ability to get civically engaged. I think one of the reasons why I enjoy the job that I do is because we're telling people to get civically engaged from an environmental perspective, which people aren't expecting, right? And I think, there's all the typical places where you're here to get voted. But when you're having a conversation with a healthcare worker, when you're having a conversation with your friend family, that's like, those are the really important conversations that change people. Like, we always talk about like social media influencers, like, you are influencers on people's lives. And I think it's so important that they hear from you, who theoretically has no skin in the game when it comes to politics, to get engaged with voting. That is extremely impactful and goes so much further than, the ad on TV that says vote for this or that person because they did this or that. So it is so important that you all have these conversations with people.
Okay, I guess I'm up. I want to underscore everything that T is saying in the chat. Hi, T. Oh my gosh. Yes, if I could say here, make space for CHWs. A, because it's National CHW Awareness Week, and B, because these are power players. We are power players within our communities. As we think about community health workers, in our culture, we say nothing about us without us. Again, you heard me say it earlier, and I'm going to say it here again. Oftentimes, we know the solutions that we need to the problems within our community. CHWs are very, very close to their communities. They've got their pulse, the finger on the pulse of everything that's happening within their communities. And they can be your biggest ally, your biggest advocate in sharing the wealth, sharing the knowledge, and really educating communities on what is needed. And so, yes, absolutely make space at the table for these leaders to come in and really champion their initiatives in really creating and making space and reaching those communities that are most vulnerable.
What I'm hearing from Justin, Honey, but particularly the two of you, is really like, we're all influencers. We are maybe we're not racking in the TikTok money, but we're connecting with our people and we're trusted. And that's really important because we listen to the people that we trust, and we go to the people that we trust. And so, just also re-emphasizing what T is putting in the chat, because I know this is recorded. Yeah, exactly, Justin. I know this is recorded and we're not, the chat is not on YouTube. So what T is saying, because it's really important, create a space for people to come together, to feel empowered to vote, to feel empowered to be part of this process. Come together and look at local, regional, and national events. Allow spaces to ask questions and be empowered by knowledge. In terms of asking questions, if you have questions, go to Monica, because they can help you, particularly as 501c3s. Educating our people on the process of voting, on their local, regional, and national network. And on talking about educating our people on the process of voting, I just wanted to say a few things because we were saying it before. For everyone here, there are so many things we can do. Monica talked about everything that we can do, which is so much. So a few things that you could all do right now is talk to the people in your community to register to vote. As Justin said, then recheck if they're registered to vote, because sometimes the voter rolls are purged. Sometimes you've moved. I had that happen to me. Check what laws or your voter ID laws are. If you have people in your family who are students, let's say, so maybe they're just turned 18, maybe they don't have a driver's license, maybe they have a student ID, maybe they're living in a different state. There are resources that I will send in a follow-up email for student voters. What about voters who have disabilities? How can they vote? There are resources for that. There are so many things that you could share with your people. And I know we don't want to overwhelm people, but there are things, I don't mean this as an overwhelming, I mean this as arming us with resources. Learning how to just Google, check if my ballot was counted. Is my signature on my ballot verified? As we're leaning into vote by mail, this means that the way that your ballot is checked is through a signature in the system. Different states have different rules how they verify their ballots, and how they have to notify you if your ballot was rejected, and meaning that how it can be counted. These are all resources available to you. Make sure your polls haven't moved. Check the address. These are all things when we say make a voting plan with your friends and family and your people, and as organizations, things that we can share, just to remind folks about all of this. And I really appreciate Honey, Justin, Monica really sharing all of this. In terms of our final takeaway messages, I hope people don't feel as much fear, and that the anxiety is dispelled and that we feel empowered to do something. So I would love everyone to take a second and jot in the chat, and we're going to do like a chat waterfall of one thing that you plan to do in the next week to participate, to include civic engagement in your work. Sorry, I forgot that part. And I'll let everyone sit so you can just, cool. Talk to clients, make a plan to vote, share voter registration info with members. Oh my gosh. And all these resources, again, we'll send in our follow-up email. It'll be a really long list. You can forward it along. You can read it as you like. You can pick out which parts you want, but it's helpful. We have found people like it when we can compile it. Checking your voter registration. Noticing you haven't updated your name to match your license. Also checking your signature. If your signature, if you're going to vote by mail, is the correct one in the system. Blast this recording. Okay. I didn't pay anyone to say this. Help people in my network make a plan to vote. Share with social groups. Okay. I'm feeling like people are starting to get plans empowered. We really appreciate everyone taking the time. Justin, Monica, Honey, any last minute words before we wrap?
I always say push the line as far as you can. Maybe we should have paused the recording for this part, but ask for forgiveness, not permission. The IRS, if they come after you, they're going to give you a chance to like rectify the situation. So they're not just going to pull your tax exempt status, but make sure you're documenting everything. Make sure that you have a nonpartisan, independent reason for everything that you're doing. And please ask us the questions that you have. They're not silly. They're not unimportant. We're not going to get annoyed with you. Ask us as many questions as you want. So we want you to just go out and not only advocate boldly, but also fearlessly, because there's a lot that you have the right to do as a C3. And these rules are put in place exactly for that reason, to keep you from, to restrict you from lobbying as much, to restrict you from engaging in partisan activity. So you already have restrictions. Don't restrict yourself on the things that you can and can do freely.
You already have restrictions. Don't restrict yourself. I love that. Honey, Justin, last minute words.
I would say go do the thing. Go do the thing. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. So go do the dang thing already. Stop waiting. Stop being scared. Stop being nervous. If we don't do it, nobody's going to do it for us.
Wow, y'all, snippets. Justin.
And the final thing I'd say too is like, you're not doing this alone. So there's a bunch of civic engagement holidays coming up. I just put civicholidays.org in the chat. But we have voter registration day coming up. We have voter education week coming up. We have vote early day coming up. So all days where, and the websites that you see on there will give you the resources where you can talk about this, engage your communities, and connect with other people doing the exact same work. So you're not doing this alone. Yeah.
I love that. What I'm hearing is, from the three things that I outlined at the beginning: learning, celebration, and action. I feel like we did a lot of learning. This is recorded so you can go back. We're celebrating National Community Health Worker Awareness Week, National Civic Health Month. And guess what? Now we have a whole list of civic holidays to celebrate next, because we always got to be keeping the joy and the celebration. So we hope that you're channeling that joy into both celebration and then action. Remember the calls to action that were just shared. Chat with your team. Find space in your work to prioritize civic engagement, particularly before the November elections. The first deadline for voting is fast approaching. Remember all the things that we can do. So Thank you everyone for doing that course in the chat of so many things that you're going to do this week. I hope you're leaving inspired by these incredible three leaders. Please come off mute and give everyone a round of applause. Monica Graham, Honey Yang Estrada, and Justin Quassa, please. Thank you all so much. Folks, we'll continue these conversations on our next Health Justice call in October. Please sign up for our listserv in the chat so you can get that invite. And when we close out of Zoom, there's a 1-minute survey. It's quick. We want to make these calls tailored to your needs. So any feedback, we really welcome. Have a happy rest of your Tuesday. Happy Civic Health Month. Happy National CHW Awareness Week. Happy future holidays that Justin shared. And we will see you in October. Thank you, everyone. Bye, y'all.